tell there are a lot of really good conversations going on at tables. If you care to join the conversation on Twitter, if you'd like to join the conversation on Twitter, you can use hashtag EQEconvent. But it's my pleasure to introduce Brad Whitehead, our keynote today. He is the president of the Fund for Economic Future in Cleveland, Ohio. The Fund for Economic Future is a collaboration of foundations and other philanthropic partners working to transform Northeast Ohio's economy. Brad helped establish the fund in 2004 while working as a senior fellow at the Cleveland Foundation. Before joining the Cleveland Foundation, Brad spent 20 years at McKinsey & Company after studying at Harvard. His full bio is in your conference booklet if you'd like to learn more. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Brad to come up.
Thank you, Keith, and good afternoon. Listening to the conversations and having driven around yesterday, I'm struck with two thoughts initially here. The first is, this is a beautiful community you have, and this is a great hotel. I need to get back here on vacation with my family. It really is extraordinary. And second, I thought I was here to share some of my stories from the coalface, but having listened to the panel this morning, I think my job today is to be here and to try to recruit Matt, Nancy, and Carlos to relocate back to Northeast Ohio, because what they're doing is a lot of what we're aspiring to do in Northeast Ohio. And in particular, the way that they have been able to come together and as Nancy said, to integrate as opposed to just collaborate. One of my colleagues talks about his great disdain for collaboration, and that there are too many instances where the exercise we're in here is just about collaboration. So as Keith indicated, I lead a philanthropic collaboration in Northeast Ohio that's focused on the long-term economic vibrancy of Northeast Ohio. And I was also struck this morning at the outset when we talked about what have been the lessons learned by the Philadelphia Fed. Teresa outlined that there were three things that they learned. The first was that equity doesn't happen by accident. And I think the quest that we're on at the fund is to see whether equity can in fact happen by intention. And I think that's the quest we're all on. The second is that the exercise is an interdisciplinary one. And the third is that it takes capacity. And so if there's a story I hope to impart today is that at least in our little neck of the woods, in Cleveland, Akron, Canton, and the rest of Northeast Ohio, we're making a bet to see whether in fact if equity can in fact happen by intention and whether an investment in capacity pays off. The ground I want to cover today is severalfold. First is to describe for you the overall aspiration that we've had in terms of a transformational economic program over the last decade. But then second, to talk about why that fell short in terms of addressing issues of economic polarization. We had inclusion in our mission right from the outset, but it was a bolt-on strategy. And as a bolt-on strategy, we found that it didn't work. So that's caused us to have to pivot in the last couple of years. So then third, I'll share a frame that we're using to think about how to embed this into our growth and strategies. Discuss for a moment why that's so blasted hard to do, and then close hopefully with a couple of thoughts that may be relevant in your own markets. And the headline on those is that if there were three things I would wish on other people, one is we kind of rebel against it sort of in that collaboration theme, but it is well worth spending the time and energy and financial resources to get a shared understanding in the community about why this is an important issue. Second is that you need to build growth and opportunity or equity or polarization or such into the strategies that you have in the community and in the parts of the community. And then third, I'll suggest that you need to have a set of interconnected initiatives that link around job creation, job preparation, and job access. So that's where I hope we'll go in today's conversation. Just a little bit of background on who we are. I guess Adam this morning asked me about Halloween. Anybody here from Northeast Ohio? Okay, so I am feeling lonely. Anybody here from philanthropy? We had one. Okay, we got some of our people. But I am from Northeast Ohio, which, for our definition, counts as an 18-county area that encompasses Cleveland, Akron, Canton, Youngstown, Warren, but it also incorporates Lorain, Elyria, Medina, Massillon. And so I think I understand and am sensitive to the breadth of issues and the breadth of city sizes that you all are dealing with here today. In fact, I think it makes this a more interesting journey for us to have to try to balance what we can learn in some of the smaller communities where we can be a little bit more nimble and then trying to scale those up to some of the larger communities. So in fact, some of the best work going on in Northeast Ohio is happening in our cities with populations from 50 to 100,000 residents, just because it's easy to maneuver the ship. So we're about $200 billion, which puts us about on par, by the way, collectively, in terms of output, puts us about on par with Peru, New Zealand, and Czechoslovakia. It's not exactly Germany and Spain, but it is a relevant unit. And I know it's not a topic for this conference, but in some of the sidebar conversations I've been having with you all is the degree to which you in this room not only are leading your communities, but whether you're connected as a region. And because we found that any of our individual communities, that just simply wasn't that relevant on a national or global scale, but collectively, we were an economic unit that seemed to matter. So different topic, different day, but the value of regionalism. So we know pain. We know pain in Northeast Ohio. We have been underperforming the U.S. economy. Here you see the red line being Northeast Ohio. NEO, by the way, is Northeast Ohio. We've been underperforming the U.S. economy really since the mid-1960s. The high water mark for our productivity, I believe, was 1952. And so what we aren't dealing with a couple of exceptions, is a bump in the road. It's a fundamental economic transformation that is the challenge in front of us. This came to a head really in the early 2000s when our major newspaper, the Cleveland Plain-Dealer, ran a series called The Quiet Crisis, and saying that unlike other places where you would have devastation that occurred either because of war, nature, or some other thing, that we had this slow slide in the mediocrity that was really threatening our livelihood. And I think one of the more poignant moments for us was when Entrepreneur Magazine ranked the 61 largest cities for entrepreneurship. Of course, where did Cleveland land? 61. Which had everybody asking the question, why couldn't we rank top 60? But in any case, this then all led to this, it came to a head really for us in 2004 when the philanthropic community came together and said, it's time to do something. And at least as I looked around the United States, the energy for that sort of conversation can come from all sorts of places. Sometimes it comes from the electeds, sometimes it comes from universities, sometimes it comes from a business chamber, sometimes it comes from a single corporation, sometimes it comes from a civic organization like the United Way. In our case, it happened to come from the philanthropic community. And so in 2004, what started as 7 or 8 foundations eventually became some 50+ foundations who decided to pool their resources and address long-term issues of economic competitiveness in Northeast Ohio. What motivated them was several thoughts. The first is, after 40 or 50 years, it's pretty clear that the economy is not going to fix itself. I suppose over the very long term it does, but it's certainly not within generations it wasn't going to fix itself. And we're all in the same economic boat, and we're all in the same economic boat, not only in our communities, but there had been a lot of rivalry between Cleveland and Akron and Canton, Massillon, and Youngstown and Warren. And it's like, oh, really? The rivalry here? It's like, who's slightly less worse than the other one? And so there was this sense that we're all in it together, that philanthropy does have a role. This was not natural for us. Most of us have missions that have to do with early childhood education or the environment or social services and so forth. But we realized that with the disappearance of many of the large corporations as they became more global and threatened by international forces, that we were an institution of permanence and we had to play a role. That every voice matters in the conversation. And notably, and this has come up several times this morning, this stuff that we're working on, this idea of transformation, is long-term, important, but really, really messy work that will be generations unfolding. So after some deliberation, we set ourselves a goal, which I got a bunch of numerics and such if you want, but overall, I think the main point is the goal was nothing short of saying we needed economic transformation. We needed to go from old growth industries that were growing 0 to 2% a year to high growth industries that might be growing 3 to 5% a year. And that was not going to be a simple project. I can't remember who it was this morning. Eric may have been used said that there was a silver bullet. If there's no silver bullet or rifle shot that would do this, but it needed to be a fundamental transformation that had to be regional, integrated, and systemic. And so then through the course of that, we have built this network then of foundations. We have some 50 different philanthropic entities that is really a hodgepodge of funders. It ranges from traditional foundations to community foundations to corporate giving programs to hospital endowments to university endowments and others. So it was a great come together of the philanthropic community to try to work on these issues, to see if we might model the behavior that we're calling for in others and recognizing that this is a team sport. Since our inception in 2004, we've mobilized now a little over, maybe about $110 million to work on a comprehensive regional economic strategy. And we do that through 3 different sorts of things. One is we decided from the outset we were going to focus on what matters. And so we do invest and collaborate with the Federal Reserve Bank and others on research as to things that matter to the longer-term health of an economy. A second is that we decided that we would try to hold people around the table to work together. And third is we put our money where our mouth is, so we would make grants to organizations that were going to work on this strategy. And this strategy was then things like new industry development, industry clusters. It was to try to bring more capital into the community through the formation of venture capital funds and the attraction of venture capital funds, working on innovation with companies and the like. So that's where we were. We've been plucking away at that for now about a dozen years. And what has it gotten us? We think of evaluating our success on 3 levels. We have those people who want those tangible metrics of what we've done. Then we think about whether we're reforming the systems, the system of entrepreneurship, the system of business development, the system of new industry development. And then we'll take on about every 2 or 3 years a civic issue. Early on it was regionalism, then it was collaborative networks, and now, as we'll talk about today, is growth and opportunity. So the work of our grantees has resulted in about 16,700 jobs, about $650 million in payroll, and about $3.5 billion of capital into the region. result has been there's a sense that things are changing in Northeast Ohio. If you would have been on the streets of Massillon or the streets of Elyria a decade ago, there was just a lot of hand-wringing about what the future might mean. The metal bending industry didn't feel like it had a future anymore. The polymer industry felt like it was flat on its back and wasn't ever going to come back. And so not only was there hopelessness around unemployment and such, there was hopelessness around the future. Now there's a palpable sense that we have things that will allow us to compete in the global economy, whether that's precision manufacturing, whether that's advanced coatings, medical imaging, and a whole raft of industries that we've pursued. So there is a renewed sense of optimism in the community. And it appears that we're creating some good jobs. This is some work done by one of the economists at the Cleveland Fed, who just looked at what's happening with some of our gaps in Northeast Ohio versus the rest of the nation. Here it's looking at output growth and then real income growth. And if you use the longer time frames, going back to when we got started, you can see we were way behind the rest of the country. You use a shorter time frame, we're a little bit less behind. And then in more recent years, it feels like we're catching up, but in the case of income growth, we're showing some real signs of progress. So we're creating good jobs. In fact, in the work we've done, the average income of the jobs, the 16,700 jobs that I talked about, is over $50,000 a job. So we have a lot to feel good about in that respect. And you start seeing Brookings did a report, we probably may have seen it as well, because your communities, I think, were included in this report. It looked at a set of 33 advanced industries and what was happening, and we see the job growth in our neck of the woods is outpacing the country in terms of some of these 900 jobs. So good news, we're getting some coverage in the press about the things that are going on, and the real reason we knew we were coming back is the king is home. The king is back to rule the kingdom. But there is a real sense of swagger. A swagger back in the community, a sense of momentum, and so forth. And so that's something we're feeling good about. But it's a good on the one hand. And unfortunately, there is an important other hand that is of great concern. And there's been a dark side of all this, and that is that economic polarization obviously is a global phenomenon. It's a national phenomenon, and it's playing out in Northeast Ohio, and at least our read of the data says it's worse for us than it is elsewhere in the country. And so this becomes a real issue for us. And in fact, it's two issues that we're confronting. So we've done a good job creating those high-paying jobs, but we're not creating enough jobs. And so if we look at just the simple level of job growth, we're still well below the rest of the country. So issue number one is, it's great we got the high end, but we need regular jobs, good paying jobs. And then second is we do have this great mismatch between the jobs that are being created and the skills and talents of our workforce. So half the jobs require some sort of high skills and offer high wages, but we have better than half of our population, really closer to 60%, that don't have a college degree, and a full third of our residents don't have an education past high school. So we have this horrible situation of this mismatch that is in terms of skills. But then the second mismatch we have, and this one's not reported as much, but it's much more structural, is the mismatch geographically. And what we're finding is that where the jobs that we do have that are created are further and further away from the people that need them. And I should have looked it up, but I don't know how it works in Pennsylvania, but in Ohio, we've got these crazy rules that public transportation can't even cross a county border. And so most of the job growth right now is happening outside the counties of our major metropolitan areas, which means if you live in the core city, you can't get to the job on public transportation. Your rate of car ownership is lower, and even if you had a car, if you're going to go to a job that's going to pay you a 9, 10, 10.50 an hour, and you're driving 50 miles to 60 miles round trip, you're working 2 hours just to be in the job. And so this is really causing this incredible situation of concentrated poverty. The metric we like to use to look at this is labor force participation rates in economically distressed communities. So where do we have people who are completely disconnected from the labor force and are at the bottom quartile of economic performance? And about 1 in 20 of our residents are living in one of those neighborhoods. And they're spread out, that's a map of Northeast Ohio, they're spread out all around Northeast Ohio. About half of the 200,000 people that are in that situation live in Cleveland. Only about half of those 200,000 people live in Cleveland. We've got economically distressed neighborhoods in all 18 counties of Northeast Ohio, rural counties, urban counties, and the whole bit. So this is something that plagues us across the entire region. So that begs the question, what can we do about this? So of course, being good students of the Federal Reserve Bank and partners with them, we started with that question, and we've been doing research since our inception about what sort of things matter to an economy. And in this latest go-around, and we call it our What Matters to Metros, we took a look at these issues of job growth, income growth, and how it plays out. And the startling thing, looked at some 115 mid-sized metros across long periods of time, across 55 different variables that might affect performance. And the startling thing we found this go-around is that those communities of 115 that had experienced some of the highest level of job growth had also had some of the highest rates of poverty increases, crime increases, and inequality and polarization increases. So that wasn't good. And we said, well, why does that matter? And as somebody said this morning, it's obviously a moral and an ethical issue, but we found that it's also a business issue. And Eileen did a beautiful job this morning laying out some of those business issues. I can say we're confronting it in our work at the coalface on these sorts of things, as manifest by the reduced demand for goods and services. You see whole neighborhoods without an economy. We've got a litany of stories of business expansion that didn't happen because jobs went elsewhere, because they had more available talent. But the first question they ask is, what's the level of educational attainment of your workforce? Will I have access to the workforce in this way and that way? Will it play out that way? We have got this situation of no growth sprawl, and so our physical footprint is expanding at 70 times the rate that our population is expanding, 4.5 times the rate at which our economy is expanding, which means we have more and more infrastructure for a fixed population, which means that our taxes go up, and that leads to the fourth pernicious issue, is that the taxes we do spend have to be spent on a bigger physical infrastructure rather than being spent on the things that we know that drive long-term growth, whether that's investment in companies, innovation, and the things of that sort. So there's a whole bunch of business reasons. And then who else doesn't think just a little bit differently about Baltimore these days? I mean, Thomas Hobbes talked about this stuff in the 1600s with the social contract. How many people think these police issues are just a matter of policing issues? This is playing out real time as a result of the polarization. I literally, before I came up here on Monday, had to send a note around to my office about the evacuation procedures that we were getting from the city office in light of the expected announcement of the Michael Grillo decision, which is one of the ones that we have. And so while we have all this swagger about having the gay games and the Republican convention and so forth, it won't take much for people to say, you know, Cleveland is not the kind of place that I want to be. And we see the eroding, potential eroding of the social contract. So, that's causing us to ask a different set of questions, is what kind of jobs are they? Who are those jobs for? And where are those jobs located? And the dialogue has changed, not only in the social service organizations, but in the chambers and elsewhere, from being jobs, jobs, jobs. So our thinking around this now is it's about job creation, job preparation, and job access. And that really is the frame that we're using for our growth and opportunity work. What's fascinating, and I think this is where philanthropy comes in, but it can be any group, is that there are these different worlds that are dealing with this. This came up this morning as well. There's sort of the growth camp of the economic developers who are saying, well, let's just make sure we get the pie bigger, and later on we'll worry about how to distribute the pie. And then you got the opportunity campers, who were the traditional workforce or the traditional social service organization who had at their core was thinking about making sure their people, whoever their people are treated well in the course of this thing, and that they were kind of viewing the world through these different lenses, and neither felt responsibility for the other. So the economic developers felt that, yeah, that polarization is tough. Somebody ought to go fix that. Or if you were in one of those social service organizations, you rail against the man, but out realizing that, as Nancy said this morning, if you don't have the job, no amount of workforce preparation is going to help you out. And so what we're now seeing is that these growth and opportunity camps aren't two camps. We need to create a new camp, which is the growth and opportunity camp. And so we're investing a lot of time and energy in that conversation about this is everybody's business to be dealing with these issues. As I mentioned, our frame is this threefold frame that we have to have these integrated efforts that the job creation world, the job preparation world, and the job access world all have to come together and work in an integrated way. What might that mean? And I'm not going to give the litany of all of our initiatives, but let me just illustrate how those three may come together in the rejuvenation of manufacturing. So in job creation, we have an initiative we're calling the Partners for Regional Innovation Services for Manufacturers. And it's trying to connect all the assets that we have in our universities and finance companies and NASA and so forth to support small to mid-sized manufacturers to help them move into new markets. And so it would be a company like Norman Knoll, who does precision gear manufacturing, who is now the largest producer of cardiac stents in the world. So moving from low growth to a high growth industry. But what good is that job if it's all happening outside of where the people who need the jobs are? Which means that we then, and that people don't have the skills for those jobs. So we're trying to couple that in manufacturing with an idea we're borrowing from New Mexico, which says that many employers now will use an educational credential as a proxy for whether somebody can do the job or not. Not really whether that really qualifies them for the job, but it's the proxy. And in fact, you look at the analysis and you see that the level of educational attainment is usually only loosely correlated with somebody's ability to perform the job. And when we have such a low rate of educational attainment, and people who are coming from all these other life experiences, whether it's out of the military, whether it's from another job, whether it's back into the workforce, it's just simply not realistic to expect them to go off and take a couple of years off to go get that higher education before they enter the workforce. So there are various tests out there, WorkKeys being one of them, where you can test competencies that are relevant to a job, which is called skills-based competencies. And so we're importing a program here from New Mexico that is getting a large group of manufacturers to agree to hire based upon skills in addition to other credentials. In New Mexico, they found 40 to 70% reductions in cost and time to hire, and 50% retention rates and things of that sort. So we're trying to do that to see if we can get more candidates into the manufacturing space. And then finally, if you got the skills and you got the job, but you can't get to the job, and similar to what Adam described this morning with the Brooklyn Naval Yard, we're seeing if we can create a 21st century industrial job center in a 350-acre area in the heart of Cleveland. It's called the Opportunity Corridor. 40% of the people who live in economic distress are within 2 miles of where this road will go, and our aspiration is, can we do things that allow manufacturing to come back into this area? So all of those things have to work together, at least as we're looking at it, the strategy. The question is, what makes this thing hard? And it really boils down to the fact that no one's in charge. There's no CEO. Our economy is made up of complex systems with many different parts that have to play, and the old thou shalt with the finger waving, telling people what to do doesn't play out. So instead, one needs to get alignment across these very complex systems in order to drive that. Or as we like to say, regional collaboration and these sorts of things is an unnatural act among non-consenting adults. And so it feels spoofy to say, but spending a lot of time and energy coming to a shared understanding is really critical, because it does require these cross-sectoral solutions. They've got to be integrated across those sorts of things, and it really requires the local connecting to the regional. So I'll just close by describing our program and suggest that it may have some relevance for you. So where we are going now is we're spending our time in these 3 areas. The first is we've got a big campaign to get out to our civic leaders, whether those are the electeds, the chambers, the civic organizations, and the like, to try to preach the GNO gospel and to help people make the connections for themselves. We're currently doing some research, which we're calling the geography of growth, which just looks at where are the jobs and what does that mean. The second thing we're doing is we're seeking to get as many of the important organizations, all organizations are important, some of the most powerful organizations to incorporate economic polarization into their strategies, and whether they'll have a growth and opportunity reflected in the strategies that they have. That's true of our region-wide strategy, but we're also wanting to see this down at the local level, and we're getting some good lift in that. And then third is, of course, it ultimately has to translate into real work. And so we're trying to drive some of these specific initiatives. We've got about 11 that are on our hot list right now. Most of them revolving around, we feel like we're doing pretty well in terms of our job creation work. And most of them now are around job prep and job access. So that's where we are. Again, I don't stand up here saying that we've figured it out, but at least as one practitioner to a bunch of others, this is what we're up to, and at least it's our intention to answer the question or the challenge that Teresa put out there for this morning, is whether equity can in fact happen by intention. with that, I'll stop. I don't know if Keith, we have time for people to throw something. Thank you. Any brickbats?
I run a food manufacturing maker, organic foods. My prior career was in technology, and I was always frustrated that I wasn't able to do anything about the poverty rate here in the city, which is sufficiently high, around 30%. And while for every developer that we would hire another 5 or 6 employees. That would be maybe customer service or marketing, sales, things like that. But we were not able to hire out of a particular population because of the skills gap. So I understand a lot of the emphasis on workforce development. One of the reasons we started the food company was to specifically to hire people out of poverty. We decided, made the conscious choice to meet people where they were rather than create a business that would have high demand for people that weren't around here in the first place. So I just wanted to point out that manufacturers who tend to be their own CEOs can make that, or entrepreneurs can make that choice to build businesses that require labor that doesn't require such a high level of skill. We get so focused on technology and advancement that we forget where a large part of the population is currently.
Thank you, amen. That's great. I hope your company's doing well and is hiring people. And the food industry in particular is one we're seeing as a promising area, and I hope it's working out. I couldn't agree more that every job is a good job, but not all jobs are created equally. And thinking through what are the jobs and the career ladders and so forth. Just to riff a bit on what you said, the other thing that so often we do with job preparation programs is that it ends at placement. And so you get the person in the job, work done, let's move on, where it's really often about advancement. I don't know if Nancy is still here. I'd be curious what they're doing in the Lehigh Valley around this as well, because we're finding that if you provide some counseling to somebody a year or two after and help them then think about, well, this is your first job, now what skills can you be building and where this might go? And we're learning that employers are quite willing to have that conversation as well because it helps them with retention and advancement.
Thank you. Just curious how you have a conversation with your state leaders, legislators, the governor, about what you're doing and maybe how that can be a state level policy that may need to change or be adapted to better enable the change that you're seeking in the Cleveland community.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and timely question for us. We have had since our inception that our strategy has to be in reference to the state strategy because that's where so much of the money is for what it is we want to do. So we work especially closely with the state government, and for county governments, it's really tends to follow more kind of who's wanting to run with things and who's not, and the same with the mayors. We early on sort of tried to respond to what the state was doing, and now we're trying to do more to shape what the state is doing. So that skills-based hiring piece, we've had a great partner in the state where we said, okay, well, we want skills scores for all the manufacturers and the jobs and so forth. And so, God bless the state of Ohio, they decided that in the statewide jobs portal, they decided they'll put skills scores on all the jobs. And so we thought that was going to be something that would come a year or two later, and they're going right after it. So I think we benefit from having a Republican governor who wants to show that he can have an urban agenda as well. and can do something that speaks to polarization. So we've got a ready audience there, and then we've got, at least in our core cities, strong Democratic mayors, so we do a little dancing between the two, but they're at least aligned on this stuff.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation this morning, and you mentioned it as well, around the manufacturing industry and how these are the better paying jobs and the jobs that we want to promote in our communities. But the fact is, retail, hospitality, these jobs still exist, right? They're going to continue to exist. So is it a necessary reality that these jobs continue to be low-wage jobs? How do we, as an industry here, encourage the hospitality industry and the retail industry to actually pay enough for families to live off of, instead of just seeking out the manufacturing jobs because they currently pay more than the others? Has there been any work that you guys have done in that area, kind of imposing the moral conversation around paying?
Well, we're not an advocacy organization, and I'll say that about half of my members are red and about half are blue. And so things like minimum wage and so forth, we generally stayed away from because it's becomes very challenging internally for us. One of the things that we are trying to do, though, is to be working with career ladders, and particularly in the retail area, so that if you get that first job and it's a low-wage job, that it starts being a ladder to doing something else. And so that the job placement and advancement programs shouldn't just be for the unemployed, but they should be for the underemployed as well, and strategies with them. So I'm definitely skirting the first part of your issue, which is what's the right wage, but hopefully addressing at least another thing, which is to make sure that people who are in the low-wage jobs have a shot at moving on.
Hello. You mentioned one of your strategies was to create a shared understanding out of the growth and opportunity. Who is your target audience, and what message really resonates with them, especially around regionalization issues?
Great question. So our target audience is both growth camps and opportunity camps. And so it is economic development organizations, chambers, and their boards of directors. It's United Way agencies, workforce investment boards, and groups, a lot of CECs and things of that sort, and then the electeds. And I don't want to say we changed the story, because the story is the story, but we're definitely trying to get across that this is a business issue with the growth camp and with the opportunity camp. We're trying to really get across the idea that we're in a cycle, and unless we address the growth issues, we can't. So there's maybe a little of the nuance, but then what's best is when we have the two groups get together. And I just want to emphasize again, anybody can call the meeting. It just happens for us that it's philanthropy, but it can be business, it can be universities, it can be others. Thank you. Should I mention the evaluation so I can get an extra cookie? Thanks a lot, and I look forward to learning from you as well.
Brett, thank you very much for your comments. You know, I feel like we all can learn so much from one another within this room and within Pennsylvania. Your presentation for me was a reminder of how much we can learn hearing from experts from outside the region. So could you join me one more time? I've been asked to mention that we will be posting the PowerPoint presentations on our website after the event, probably not immediately after, but before too long. We'll have those up. I'm basing my next commitment on nothing that I've actually heard, but we will email you when they're up. So anyone who has attended, I'm committing now that you will know when they're posted. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome the panelists participating in the different perspectives on equitable economic development to join me up here. So on this panel, the speakers will challenge us to think critically about the equitable implications of both new and traditional economic development tools. Sean Zielenbach, president of SZ Consulting, will moderate the conversation. Sean, can you join me?
Don and Alan, do you want to come up, Joe? We're going to do this as a single panel instead of two separate panels. Because what we're going to be focusing on here is, as we've heard all morning, and through the keynote address, obviously the issue here is how do you create jobs and how do you bring businesses into underserved markets. But the market doesn't do that on its own. So inevitably there's some need for public finance, public incentives to bring in these companies. So we've got, in this case, we're going to be talking about a few different incentives. One is the neighborhood improvement zone, which is in Allentown. And Don is going to speak about that. And then Scott's going to talk more broadly about the variety of programs that the state of Pennsylvania has to promote business development in lower income communities. There are a number of controversies around these programs, starting with how equitable are they? Are these really essentially corporate giveaways? Are they truly benefiting lower income residents in these areas, or are they simply helping the corporate sector? Alan's going to talk a little bit about that. Jeff is going to talk a bit more about how we should really think about evaluating these programs. He's got experience working from Pew, looking at a variety of state and increasingly local programs around the country, and really getting them to think about the types of issues they should be considering when looking at these incentives. So with that kind of as the introduction, I want to pass it off to Don. If you can talk a little bit about your background, and then tell us a bit about Allentown.
I'm working? Too well. Well, thank you, and I do want to talk a little bit about the NIS, but I also want to talk about the organization that I'm now shepherding, which is building on the NIS. And the NIS has indeed been an incredible engine of growth, and I want to leave Alan some room to talk about this too, because he's actually on the NIS authority that governs the details of what they do. You can see some of the basic numbers up there on this slide. The old downtown in Allentown used to be the retail center for the entire Lehigh Valley. It used to be a banking center. It used to have industrial employment in textile mills in particular. All of that is long gone. But in a short period of time, the NIS has really rebuilt employment and investment, as you see, well over $500 million in the ground already, and another $500 million on the way with job creation in the thousands. So to today's topic, while that has been incredibly important, and to me, it's necessary but not sufficient to really drive prosperity out into the neighborhoods. Hence, the organization that I'm shepherding, which just really quick description, it's not even a legal entity, it's just an unofficial collaboration between the 12 largest companies in downtown, 2 of which are Fortune 500 companies. PPL now, Air Products has moved some of their people downtown. And also the 3 largest foundations in Allentown are a member of this. And you can see what the mission statement is, which is to guarantee that the prosperity that has really ratcheted up within the central business district itself carries over into the neighborhoods. And it's already had an amazing impact, not just in numbers, but in people's attitudes that as recently as a year ago from today, it was very easy to find people in the Lehigh Valley who hadn't set foot in downtown Allentown in 20 years. And they just had the attitude, well, we've managed to concentrate poverty there. It's not my problem. It's something I can just leave behind and walk away from. It has nothing to do with me. That attitude has totally changed in a short period of time. That because of the nature of some of the things that are happening downtown, it's not just office jobs, it's an arena, it's concerts, it's a lot of restaurants, things that have brought people back downtown. And it really started to generate some discussion about the need for economic diversity back in downtown. To turn some of the surrounding neighborhoods back to what they were in their heyday, when people at all income levels and all kinds of different jobs could walk to work. Whoops, wrong way. Just, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but just a few things on the nuts and the bolts of the NIVs that those are the mechanics of what it takes to do it. Somebody has to estimate what their state tax revenue is going to be, figure out how that would flow through a real estate deal, and that has incented many companies, not just the arena, but a lot of office development, a lot of employment. And those are the boundaries that the core mechanics of it. The city got to draw a 130-acre boundary on a map, and anything within those 130 acres qualifies for what I just described. And moving on to some other partnerships, certainly one thing I learned, and a lot of us have learned, is that that this can't happen in a vacuum. It takes a lot of partners. It takes complex public-private partnerships. The city had set some things in motion with doing some fairly comprehensive neighborhood involvement efforts to develop a new revitalization plan for Center City. So a lot of us, the private sector folks that I represent, the community folks that Alan represents, decided, well, that their plan may not be perfect, but it's something we can line up behind. It has a lot of good objectives and tangible measurements that they're proposing. So we decided not to reinvent the wheel. Neighborhood partnership program, I think I will leave Alan to talk about this, but I also co-chair of a neighborhood partnership program. Carlos this morning talked about the incredible use that he's made of that program for Tech Central and the other really amazing things that he's done here in Center City, Lancaster. But we have one of those programs in place in Allentown as well, and a lot of the same corporate members that are part of my steering committee contribute to this work as well, and that's an important partnership. Some of the things I really want to talk about, there's some obvious things for a group like mine to do that have been successful in other cities. One is a Live Near Your Work program that we just launched, that I liberally borrowed and stole from places like Philadelphia and Baltimore, where we're going to offer $10,000 forgivable loans to the numerous new employees who have moved downtown to encourage them to buy houses in the surrounding neighborhoods, and that's just being launched as we speak. But one of the things we learned really quickly is that if we're going to engineer any lasting change in these neighborhoods, change in the education system is really at the root of that and is imperative. Just a couple of things that we're doing. Some of them are listed up there. That we're building a new high school within the downtown. a very innovative high school. Everything they do is strongly data-based. It's rooted in experiential learning. It's competency-based, and it's very much working with career pathways to make sure that students are learning things, learning skills that will get them jobs. Something else that this could be a whole seminar in itself, but I just think this is incredibly important at the other end of the education age spectrum. I just think we have to do massively more with high quality early childhood. And pay for success is something that we've been moving along very strongly in the Lehigh Valley to attract private capital essentially to pay for way more high quality early childhood. And we're blessed to have some of the systems we have in place here, the Keystone Star system, where we don't have to figure out what constitutes high quality. There's an excellent system in place in Pennsylvania to do that already. And if we can attract more money to frankly deliver on the promise that every child has access to high quality early childhood, it drives cost savings through the system in various ways, but in particular by reducing the number of children who need special education once they get to K-12 years of their educational path. And since it costs 2.3 times as much to educate a special education child, and the Allentown School District has 3,000 children on that path, if you knock even modest percentages off of that, you're talking about a significant cash flow. And these deals have gone from being interesting academic discussion to real deals that in particular Chicago and Salt Lake City did large deals to do exactly what I just described in the fourth quarter of last year. And I'm probably going over one time here, so you've heard a lot about workforce and economic development, so I won't say a whole lot about this, but there's an employment center that Nancy's organization runs, since he's not here anymore, right in the Ms, and has produced, I think, pretty impressive jobs. Just in the one block, the square block that is the arena block 4 of the Ms, it's produced those numbers, 925 jobs. And 62% of those went to Allentown residents, most of whom can walk to work from their center city neighborhoods. But the employment centers are right there in their neighborhood. And we've already discovered there needs to be some pretty quick follow-up. Somebody asked the question, well, what do you do after you get a person a job? What follow-up is there? And clearly there's a need, even if it is in hospitality jobs, which may not be the best jobs, even those jobs, there's a skill set and some training necessary. And then there's programs being devised to do that. And the last thing I'll say is just another program that we've worked with. We know that we business people don't speak for the neighborhood. The MVP program has a significant mechanism for our sort of broad and deep advisory committee to really make the decisions for that program. But Promise Neighborhood, just modeled after the Harlem Children's Zone, has really done a deep dive into that and has been able to do some amazing things like surveys that get an 80% response rate in the neighborhoods we're talking about.
Thank you, Don. A couple of questions just coming out of that. You mentioned that there are 3,000 to 4,000 new jobs in downtown. Do you have a sense of how many of those jobs are held by Allentown residents?
I do have some sense in the numbers I had up there that are basically just the jobs within the arena block, meaning the arena itself, the companion hotel. About 65% of those jobs, by heart counts.
65% of the 900 jobs.
Correct, right. Now it gets a little more complicated when you measure, National Penn Bank moved their headquarters in there. So a fair chunk of those 3,000 jobs are their employees. I don't know that anybody's done a rigorous analysis of jobs moving in from elsewhere. How many of those are city residents versus people who live elsewhere? Obviously, a much smaller percentage. No doubt about that. But they're jobs that certainly could be aspirational for neighborhood people. A lot of those bank jobs are operation. They're not all vice presidents. They're jobs that are bank operation jobs that could be helped by immigrant residents. It may take some time to morph into that.
And do you have a sense of, these 3,000 to 4,000 jobs, how many of them are net new jobs? In other words, net as in
To the
jobs
state or the region?
to the region. I mean, how many of them are essentially moving from the burbs into the
Right.
city? So we haven't really created anything. And how many of them are truly new, additional gross domestic product type jobs?
Well, again, of the 900 jobs in the arena block, the vast majority of those are new. I mean, the hotel didn't exist, the arena didn't exist. A significant portion of the office jobs that have been brought in, to be candid, are jobs that have come in mostly from the suburbs in the Lehigh Valley. Now, to my way of thinking, that still serves a public purpose. There have been a lot of programs that have fueled the exodus of jobs from Center City. And to me, yes, it would be better to create totally new jobs and to pull them from other states, but it still serves a purpose to reinvigorate a downtown. And there's some number, and I don't have the statistic, but there are job creation programs in place. There's 2 Main Street programs downtown, in particular the 7th Street Main Street program is a neighborhood-based economy. So there's been a lot of startups, small businesses, and some chunk of the number are purely creating jobs. And actually something I didn't have time to talk about, but I said Allentown used to have a manufacturing-based economy even downtown. And I don't know if Matthew's still here, but some of the programs that he talked about there's a significant reindustrialization strategy going on in Allentown. Again, jobs that people can walk to work. His Hive 4A program that he created is only 2 blocks from Allentown's downtown in an old Mack truck facility. So those are by definition really creative jobs coming out of that incubator and startups.
Thank you, Don. Scott, can you, the state has been involved in Allentown and elsewhere with a variety of job development, sort of broader economic development programs. Can you talk a bit about sort of the types of programs that the state has, how they interact with some of these local efforts, and what lessons you've learned having been in this for about 30 years now?
Okay, well, let me sort of start so when I started with the state 30 years ago, I had a mentor named Ivan Tylowski who went to Cornell Planning School, right? And Ivan's holy grail was, what are the root causes of economic distress? And he spent a career working on that. I'm not sure that there's one answer to that. But one thing that he said that seems to be true to me is, if you don't have local leadership, that's a problem. And the places that are chronically distressed don't have great local leadership. Those are the things that I've observed over a career, and I'm talking about the public sector and the private sector. It takes both to have a sort of healthy community, healthy local regional economy. Because we've got 2,560, I don't know, 4 or 5? Somewhere in there. Municipalities in the state, it's, all this is like starting with one hand tied behind your back. It's a challenge because we have so many units of government starting to do this. It makes it just a little bit more difficult. But communities that plan, communities that have a vision, all right, plan to succeed, have a much greater chance of succeeding than folks that don't. And unfortunately, at least it appears to me, the majority of communities don't have a plan for economic development. Well, that's not something we do in local government, economic development. That's up to the county, that's up to the state, that's up to the nonprofit groups, all right? But we don't have the resources for that because we've got 2,560, whatever, all right? So it's really critical, and some of the places that we've observed that have planned for success, that have great public sector leadership and private sector leadership, are places like the Lehigh Valley, places like Meadville, Pennsylvania. There are others in Pennsylvania, but those two are a couple that I've looked at over a long period of time, sort of observed why. All right, and you look at the Lehigh Valley. So they started their economic development efforts back around 1956 or 57. All right, when the state passed a law said, we'll loan you half the money to build a business park or to build a building if you put up the other half, but you got to have a private nonprofit to do that. And they did one right away because they said, and this is the founding fathers of the Lehigh Valley said, look, we might not always have steel. Things are great now. We might not always have Mack trucks of the world. We need to diversify our economy. All right? So we need to start building business parks so when businesses want to expand in the Lehigh Valley, want to come to the Lehigh Valley, they've got a place to do it. That is still critically important. Having the infrastructure in place to accommodate job growth is really important. You look at a place like Meadville, Pennsylvania. All right, now Meadville's a little bit more off the beaten path than what the Lehigh Valley is, and not a recipient of folks flocking to get out of New Jersey and New York for good reasons, and according to me anyhow. But Meadville has a history of entrepreneurship, like not a lot of places. So these are all, it's the tool and die sort of cradle of civilization, if you will. So they've got a lot of independent business people there, ran their own businesses, and said, you know, we need to make a healthier community for us to be successful here. And so they banded together. They took multiple organizations, redevelopment authorities, and IDCs and IDAs, and put them on one place for good economy of scale reasons, and said, we're going to do economic development that way. And we're not afraid to get companies to come here that is going to, you know, price us out of the market for employees. We want a healthy community. And it goes to the public sector too, and they have schools up there that are doing things like, you know, alternative energy in the school and biomass boilers, because they see the more efficient they can be, the more money can go into the real education part of it. So it's really critical, local leadership. And what can a community do? Have sound infrastructure in place, all right? That's important. Have a smooth planning, zoning, permitting, subdivision. So when a business wants to locate there, it's not beating their head against the wall. It's a good experience, all right? And of course, the word spreads on things like that. And I don't need to go into any detail on the importance of good schools, all right? I know it's been talked about a lot here today. So specifically, some of the programs, in addition to, you know, the NIS and the CRIS, there's a couple of those in Pennsylvania, but essentially giant tax increment financing programs, like on steroids, all right? One of the other tools that Pennsylvania created back in 1998, all right? So back in the Ridge administration, something called Keystone Opportunity Zones, with the idea of, let's take those blighted properties, underutilized properties in communities. How can we attract investment to them? So the deal is, for 10 years, if the local taxing bodies say, we'll give up taxes for 10 years if we can get someone to come invest in this site, and the state says, we'll give up taxes for 10 years if people will come there, it's been a very successful program. When businesses are looking to expand in Pennsylvania, when businesses are looking to relocate into Pennsylvania, show us your Keystone Opportunity Zone. For the most part, they've been used for those types of properties in core communities, all right? Creating jobs where there's need jobs. And for the most part, it's been brownfield sites, underutilized sites. Not in every case, all right? But in most cases, it's been those. KOZ, so how does this work, or does it work? Because we've had folks, properties coming out of Keystone Opportunity Zones. City of Hazleton, so they're up on top of the mountain on the way up 81, mine scored land up there, lots of that in northeastern Pennsylvania, lots of hills. So they took about 1,500 acres and said, we're going to create a business park here that was generating $34,000 in real estate taxes before the KOZ. All right, so they just came out of the KOZ in 2013. So annually, they're generating, that zone is generating $3.49 million a year to the school district in property taxes. $1.5 million to the county. $600 million has been invested by companies that have located there with $135 million in payroll. Now, Granted, that's one of the best success stories, but that's what can happen, all right? Yeah, you had to put the infrastructure in. You know, businesses aren't going to say, yeah, we'll go do all the site preparation and we'll go put all the infrastructure in and then we'll locate there. It's still incumbent upon the local leaders to do that. And in many cases, that falls on the private nonprofit economic development groups to do that. And you know, Pennsylvania has a long history of sort of that kind of public economic development experience in history. And so we've got some really great economic development groups around the state because they've been at it for a while. Some of the other tools that we have to help create jobs in addition to Keystone Opportunity Zones, you know, we have some grant programs that help businesses with pretty much any factor of production, and it's different for every business what the need is. Sort of everything. What I hear all the time from businesses is workforce. All right, it's a big problem that isn't. It's not just about technical school or college. It's a big problem, and I think we all understand that. So, but we can help businesses with workforce and train that person to do that specific job through a program that's called WedNet PA, and that's what it does, and it's been successful. Keystone Communities is a program that we're in the process of melding into our economic development toolkit. It's a critical tool, all right, because business development in core communities and community development in core communities go hand in hand. And so we're going to try an experiment here where we're going to put all of that together and see if we can target resources to core communities in the state and really make an impact by putting all the resources to bear in specific core communities. So, all right, I've talked for a long time, but I will stop.
Well, you raised a couple of interesting points there. One of which was, it's almost as though you set these prerequisites for what an area needs in order to be able to take advantage of these economic development opportunities, including some of the state programs. And what I heard from you was strong local leadership, good local infrastructure, quality schools, and you know, somewhere in that list, I'm not quite sure where it goes, but you know, a quality workforce. Well, there are a number of cities in central Pennsylvania. I mean, Reading comes to mind, York comes to mind, that Harrisburg comes to mind, that are really struggling in at least a couple of those categories. So does that mean, you know, if you don't have strong local leadership, if your infrastructure is kind of a mess, if the school system is lousy, you can't really take advantage of these economic opportunities? What do you do in a place like Reading that has had disinvestment from so many of these local institutions and infrastructure for so long?
First of all, hire Albert Boskoff. Albert is the guardian angel of Reading, and he has done some amazing things in Reading. Really amazing things. So shout out to Albert. And in Reading, I'm more positive about Reading going forward than a lot of folks are. And Reading does have a significant number of economic base employers, manufacturers still, folks like DECA, all right? And these aren't high-tech jobs. You know, I've heard some, well, these are retail jobs versus high-paying jobs, okay? It's not all about that. There's sort of a continuum. You know, some great economic development, a company that's probably as impactful to agriculture in Pennsylvania as any is a company called Hatfield Meats. And they're down in Montgomery County. And they got over 1 million square feet down there. And they speak 5 languages in that plant, all right? And they bus people from core cities to their plant in Montgomery County, all right? And those are jobs that people are supporting their families with, all right? And they're by far not retail jobs. So, I think Reading is headed in the right direction. Sure, it's a big problem, some of the things. They've gone in, they've taken brownfield sites and said, now we're going to have these for economic-based businesses. And we're reserving that property, 40 acres here, 20 acres there, and they're getting some of those companies there. All right, and as the economy continues to expand and rebound, I think they're going to get more of those economic-based jobs there. But at the end of the day, you put yourself in the shoes of the businessman and where you're going to go. You want to go where, you're going to get cooperation from the local government, where you're going to have a workforce, and where you can operate efficiently and make money. And sort of the local leadership, public-private sector, are the folks that can impact that.
Well, building on that comment though, you talk about the importance of local plans. And, the municipality, the city, the neighborhood, whatever your geography is, really having a sense of what it wants to try to accomplish. And, again, that comes back to leadership and infrastructure, social infrastructure, fiscal infrastructure. How do you rate the importance of, a good plan versus kind of more market realities? I mean, if I'm a company looking to locate places, yes, I want all of these things you're talking about, but, there needs to be a compelling economic reason for me to be there.
That's absolutely the case. I mean, you can't, so there's no replacement for being on an interstate in an urban area where there's lots of people get employees. All right, location. That's still obviously very true in doing economic development and where companies want to locate. But the other side of it is, you get core communities that are off the interstate highway system. One thing about Pennsylvania, with few exceptions, and I think those exceptions are the economies that have been traditionally the coal industry, where you've got very little entrepreneurship, and you don't have a lot of folks who have a family history of making things. But those places are isolated in Pennsylvania, but nonetheless some of the more chronically distressed places in Pennsylvania. But in the rest of Pennsylvania, we have entrepreneurs, and we have a lot of people that know how to make things, all right? So in the most rural core communities of the state, in places, like Bradford and St. Mary's, where they've constructed multi-tenant buildings, all right? They pulled together a couple $1 million, $1.5 million to build that building, because there are people that are operating out of their barn, out of their garage, that they could grow that business if they only had space. And they can't go out and afford to take on a big mortgage and still keep their business afloat. But they can sure lease space for $3 a square foot. And that's what these, so those kinds of tools, those kinds of things off of the interstate highway is how you help grow your own. And those are jobs that are sustainable. You don't have to convince those people to relocate there. They grew up there, they love it there.
Thank you. Jeff, you've been working sort of from the policy level. Looking at a bunch of state economic development plans, to a lesser extent some local plans. You've been doing this for a few years now at Pew in DC. You were in Washington State beforehand. Can you talk to us a bit about sort of your current initiatives and what you think about with regard to evaluation? Sure.
I work on a project at Pew Charitable Trusts where we work with primarily state governments, although as you said, we're starting to move to work more with local government. So primarily speaking about the state level. In the last few years, we have worked with about a dozen states to put in place evaluation processes, or a process that allows the state to take a look at their incentives for economic development on a regular, sort of rigorous evaluation, and determine what's working well so that they can invest in things that are working well, and figuring out how to tweak the things that could be working better. What sort of led us down this road is as Sean mentioned, incentives, and as you all know, are a very controversial issue, and it's often very emotional and very sort of, these programs are the best thing that ever happened versus we need to get rid of them all. And we wanted to lend more of an evidence-based approach to that. So what we've encouraged states to do, and what they have done, is to put in place a process where they take a look at a subset of their incentives each year, so that all of them will be evaluated over 4 to 6 years or so, depending on the state. And they take a look at, and this is, involves the legislative and the executive branch, they take a look at the incentive and they say, does this incentive have a goal? Is it connected to some kind of overarching state goal? Oftentimes they find that it doesn't, that there's nothing stated, legislative purpose or anything else that makes it clear this is what we're trying to accomplish with this incentive. Most often it's something very vague along the lines of we want to create jobs, right? And as has been pointed out, with that kind of a goal, anything could be deemed a success, really, and anything you spend on it is worth it, right? So what we've been encouraging to do is try to think through what does success look like more specifically, not necessarily a specific benchmark, but what are we trying to accomplish with this, and how much do we want to spend on it, and what are we really trying to do here, and how can we improve this program to be more effective over time. Put in place rigorous evaluation systems. Usually state agencies, some states like Mississippi has gone to a university research center to do their evaluations. In Oklahoma just passed a law that set up a multi-agency commission that will be doing the evaluations. And then the key point is that when the evaluations are done, that they need to be connected back to the policy-making process in some way. A lot of states, including Pennsylvania, have done excellent evaluations of various programs here and there over time. But legislators don't necessarily hear about them, or they don't have an opportunity to really have to debate the issues and really hear what can they do to make these programs better, more effective. So that's what we have been primarily working on. We've also been working over the last year with a number of states, more on the executive branch side, to do quality evaluations. There's a number of things that you need to have in place, but one of the big ones is data. You have to have good data, and we find that that's missing in a lot of cases. So we've been working with executive branch agencies in 6 states to work around issues like data sharing. It's really difficult oftentimes for economic development agencies to access tax data and vice versa. But there are ways around those types of issues, so we've been identifying best practices there. We've also been most recently focused on identifying best practices for sharing information between the state and local governments. And there's some interesting approaches to that. In Michigan, for example, they have a shared they have a shared Salesforce platform that the state and local governments are all accessing that allows them to all have the same data, to all have the same information. When they're talking about a prospect, the state agency would know that he's talked to this local government or that local government and so on. So those are the types of things we're working on, and I think there was another part of your question.
Well, I mean, think about, you've heard some of the stuff that Scott's talking about. You've heard about the NIDS program that Don was talking about. When you're thinking about an evaluation or an assessment, what criteria are you using? How would you go about measuring the impact of one of these types of programs?
Sure. So we encourage states to think through a number of questions when they're looking at a program. And to be clear, what the types of evaluations we're talking about are looking at the program as a whole. It's always going to be the case that some specific projects are going to work really well and others aren't. But as a whole, how is the program working? Starting with, is the program encouraging companies to do something they otherwise wouldn't have done? And that's the most difficult one to ask and answer. There are some good practices out there. We're starting to develop some new methodologies to help states get at that question, understanding that we don't have crystal balls. Other questions, some of which have been brought up today, are these new jobs, or are you displacing other jobs in the economy? Are you helping one company at the expense of another? Are the new jobs going to people outside of the state, and is that something you want, or is that something you don't want? A lot of these types of questions are very much connected to the goal that you're trying to achieve. In some states, they really want people to move to the city, and that's their big goal. In other cases, it's really about job opportunities for the people in the state. And one key question that I think states don't ask often enough is, how does this program compare to other uses of the money that we can put this money to? And I think that that's a fair test of an incentive or any government program. Could we achieve the same program more effectively, targeting the money somewhere else? And increasingly, I think states are wanting to look at the big topic that has been discussed over and over again today is, how connected are these incentive programs to what else is going on in the economic development workforce world? And could we be more effective if we connected that better? A lot of tax incentive programs, for example, are operated and administered by the Department of Revenue and completely divorced from what's going on with people like yourselves. Those are the types of issues that I think can be raised in these types of processes.
I didn't hear you say anything specific about equity, at least the way that things have been described most of today. I mean, equity obviously means a lot of different things to different people. But in terms of targeting economic development programs and job development programs to folks at the lower end of the economic system, I mean, given the poverty rates we see in places like Reading and Harrisburg and Lancaster and these, to what extent is that consideration taken into account, either in your evaluations or the evaluations that you've been seeing?
When we work with state governments, we're ambivalent on the goals. That we don't tell states what their goals should be, which is why I don't tend to talk about these. But we work with states to kind of identify what they want to accomplish and then figure out how to evaluate whether that's happening. But in terms of targeting incentives and so on, the first question you have to ask is the incentive working at all? If it's not working, it doesn't matter how it's designed, right? You're not doing anything for anybody in that case. So that's the key question. Again, I think that some of the questions that are really important to ask are, that specifically are in equity and around community, is a lot of times states end up incentivizing one business, and so that business is growing, but another business, down the block is suffering as a result. So those types of things are really important. The question of who gets these jobs when jobs are created is a very difficult one, and I think a very important one to really think through and not just assume that we know who's going to get those jobs. It's very difficult, I think, to create a job through an incentive and have an unemployed person put right into that job, right? I think the research usually shows that the person on the ladder below them moves up and people move up, and hopefully some unemployed person is moving up. But then also there's the fact that people from outside of the area are also going to be moving and taking some of those jobs, which again is something that you might want to consider. Just a final thing on this that I think is really important is a lot of times I think states and local governments focus maybe too much on jobs and not enough on increasing earnings or increasing the standard of living of people in the community, which can come from jobs, often from jobs, but it's a different evaluation if you're looking at how many new jobs did we put people into versus did we provide people with new skills that they can earn more money for a lifetime. Those types of questions I think are often lost in the conversation about jobs.
And I have to ask this because I'm from DC as well. There's a little bit of conflict, I guess I would say, in Congress and Washington these days. Is anybody likely to listen to this? I mean, okay, part of this is Sean being cynical, but I see in so many cases that policy decisions, at least on the federal level, are made more out of ideological reasons than out of data reasons. Now, so if you come up with, if your project comes up with a bunch of findings, some of which are going to be negative, some of which are going to be very positive, how much do you expect that to be able to sway the political discourse?
So we work at the state level for that reason. I think there's more opportunity for change at the state level, generally speaking. I do think that there's a couple of reasons I'm very optimistic about it. One, there has been some success already from some of these evaluations, but in general, I think there's a greater movement towards basing policy on evidence at the state level that I think has been fairly successful in a number of areas. But I think a lot of times in the past, efforts around getting a better handle on incentives have really been from the standpoint of attacking incentives. And what we're really trying to do with the people in the states we're trying to work with is to change that conversation. So this is about what can we do to most effectively grow our economies in our state. And with that angle, I think that provides a much different outlook.
Alan, you're coming at this from a different perspective, more from a grassroots perspective, having been involved with the Community Action Agency for years and really being one of the region's foremost anti-poverty warriors. What's your reaction to the state programs and to the NIDS that we've talked about?
Well, just to
Warren Yawn, the grouchy old goat panelist of the day. I'm the token grouchy old goat. And I gotta say that, I've got a pretty dark view of the world. I think our cities are rotting, our suburbs are thriving. Our schools are the best way we lock in equity into our system. We've gotten more sophisticated in how we behave as a racist society. And so when I saw that the Fed was doing a session on equity, I thought, nobody cares about equity. Nobody say who are you and what have you done with the Fed? So I want to thank Keith and Teresa and Aaron and everybody for doing this and giving me some reason to be hopeful that people do care about equity issues. But for me, the rules are stacked against our cities in Pennsylvania. How we do land use planning, how we fund public education, those are neat little tricks that we have for making sure our cities can't survive. Basically the way it works is the people who need the services but can't afford them are stuck in the cities, and the people who can afford services but don't need them have the luxury of living in our suburbs. And the price you pay for quality of life through the taxes that you pay, the deal is reversed. You pay less for the higher quality of life through the taxes that you pay in our society. There's no way cities can survive under those rules. So the NIS was something that, I was just thrilled to hear. We were working on revenue sharing kinds of proposals and other kinds of things, and state planning board was looking at it during the Randall years. And while we were doing this, Pat Brown just snuck this legislation into the statutes. So Pat Brown, Republican state senator, is my hero. What he's done is completely changed the marketplace and leveled the playing field, actually slanted it back in favor of the cities. So, things like job creation, things like tax-based improvement, things like improving property values, eliminating blight, those are all equity measures that are important. And these are all things that are happening because of this NIS. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a huge advocate of the NIS. And as soon as I found out about it, I called the mayor and I said, Ed, put me on that board. Because I wanted to get in on it and try to skim as much money out of that system as I possibly could. The problem is that it doesn't allow much of that to happen, and so we've had to look for creative ways of getting the point across. So there's no single power source in this whole NIS thing. Obviously, the city's got a lot of influence and power, and it is the board that governs the financing has power. But the force that has the most power is the developer. We've got an unbelievably prolific developer who's taken this job on, and he's going to make a ton of money. And in my opinion, the best community development program is called a profit. Is the profit fair? Is the profit being shared? Those are all issues that we've got to ask. But as far as I'm concerned, there's been hugely important work done here. Now, when it started, some of the frankly non-sophisticated community groups wanted to do a so-called community benefits agreement where you kind of get a deal up front to do a variety of things. But because there was no single centralized source of power, there's nobody to really hold responsible. The mayor couldn't force the developer couldn't force a NISA couldn't force the mayor. And so we sort of stepped in and said, let's take advantage of my opportunity as a board member and see what kinds of things that we can do. And so, first of all, the 67% or so of the new jobs that were created is, going to Allentown residents. I think it's a big success. That was done with some nudging from the community groups, but with a receptive employer base. We are expecting, hopefully next month, or actually July, to pass a rule that says any new apartments that are built in the NIS, of those, 10% of them have to be affordable for low to moderate income people. And I think we're going to get that put into place, which I think will be an important step. Now that's intended, frankly, to offset some of the gentrification that we have to do in the neighborhoods. I am not an opponent of gentrification. My feeling is that you can't have a functioning community without a functioning marketplace, and you can't have a functioning marketplace where everybody's poor. So you've got to have a mix of incomes in the neighborhood. The market's got to work. And so we need to fix up the housing stock. We need to attract some owners. We need to attract some people with money to spend in that marketplace. And my hope is that that fair share provision, where 10% of the new apartments must go to low to moderate income people, that will be something of an offset for the displacement that typically could occur as part of gentrification. You know, in my mind, the long-term benefits of this are going to come in the following kinds of things. First of all, the first development that takes place across the street from the
For instance, the grant program that we have, really the only grant program that we have directly to businesses for job creation projects, is our PA First program. So over the course of the history of that program and its predecessor, which is 1996, when it was created, the private investment in public investment has been 49-1. That's a pretty good deal. All right. The other part of this side is because there's people looking over our shoulder all the time, as well they should be. What do you do when businesses don't create the jobs? All right. So we have folks who that's all they do every day. That's their job, is to monitor these projects. Any grant loan or tax credit that had job creation requirements come along with it, they monitor those companies. And so over the history of that program, you know, we've clawed back over $40 million in grant funds from businesses. And so we give them credit for what they've achieved, and what they haven't achieved, they're paying back the grants. And we need to do that. It's the taxpayers' money. All right? They expect jobs in return. All right? And so, you know, that doesn't make the headlines necessarily, but those are the kinds of things that we need to do to keep those tools sustainable with the legislators, those legislators and the folks who don't think we ought to be doing it at all. So long as we're accountable and we can show, you know, a good return on investment in terms of jobs, and we're getting the money back if the jobs aren't created, and I think we can sustain those tools to continue to help companies create jobs.
What do you do though in cases in which you could have all of these job requirements built in, and you do this in 2006, for example, 2006, 2007, and then the market crashes, and you know, a lot of companies go out of business. Certainly, the job growth or the job creation doesn't happen. How realistic is it, given the variety of factors that affect companies' hiring decisions and retaining decisions? Stuff that they have control over, stuff that they don't have control over. I mean, a new plant opens in Vietnam, you know, all of a sudden their opportunities may disappear. How realistic is it for you to be holding companies to specific job numbers?
So that's a great question. And because we lost one of our customers, it's not a good reason to not create the jobs. Or because, you know, another supplier took our place, that's not a reason. You need to go out and get other deals. All right? So we just came through the Great Recession, the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. All right? So over the course of the projects that received funding over that, because we were just audited by the Auditor General on this, all right? 96% of the jobs that were projected to be created and retained were through the worst recession that this country has seen since the 1930s. So what goes in up front is the due diligence of the people that work at the state and the governor's action team to say, all right, how likely is this going to be a successful deal? All right, and so there's a lot of due diligence. We don't take lightly investing in companies. We expect them to get the return on investment, and we expect loans to get paid back. That's how we survive. If we don't get paid back, we don't have a revolving loan fund. And so we've taken that approach that there is no great reason to not create the jobs.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious how many small businesses participate in a CRIS deal, or is it primarily larger businesses, or maybe entirely larger businesses? That's sort of the first question.
Yeah, I can't give you a
precise number, but it's a lot of small businesses. Alan mentioned that there's an expectation of 30 new retailers before the end of this year.
Do they own capital in that? Or are they renters in the process?
No, they're renters. That's the mechanics of how this works, that you end up with a subsidized rent.
Here's my question to you. And I preface it by saying that I was one of the architects of the original KOZ concept for Joe Black. And he put the program together by reading. Talk about equity here. Equity involves wealth. Wealth is not only income, it's capital. And in this instance, most of the conversation about the workforce has been the workforce as a commodity used by a business enterprise. What I'm curious about is, if we get into the real question of equity, how do we start to drive equity so that both the income and the capital is shared more equitably? When we dealt with the predecessor to the KOZ concept, the idea was any business, large or small, that was willing to invest inside an urban area would have the opportunity to write off. We started out primarily with state taxes. The idea being that even small business could participate and generate a capital position in that process. So I'm curious how, when we talk about through this whole thing, how do you deal with equity of wealth, which includes the capital dimension? Because honestly, I'm not hearing that in this conversation.
Yeah, and wealth disparity is a huge issue for us. We help start-up neighborhood businesses get going. We do entrepreneurial training and micro-lending and technical assistance and so on. And what we were trying to put together quickly was a financing product where we would redevelop a traditional neighborhood sort of building, storefront, first floor, housing unit upstairs, merchant owns and occupies. And so we would do the development, and then a portion of the payback by the occupant would go into an escrow fund so they could buy out the building and start gaining equity. And the market is so efficient, it works so fast, that property values went up so quickly. By the time we could even think about putting something on paper, much less operationalizing it, the market had beat us. And as I said earlier, what's happening is it's long-term slum landlords that are the ones benefiting, the people who haven't put anything in those properties in decades. So, I think we need to do creative things like that. We just need to be able to do them quickly. And in the nonprofit sector, in the government sector, those kinds of nothing happens quickly. But that's the kind of thing I think we need to do. As a renter in a building, you're not going to get equity in the building, but you get equity by taking money out of the business and putting it into a wealth management fund or something like that.
Yeah, if that small business is paying $5 a square foot rent instead of $25 a square foot rent, as Alan just said, they're not building equity in real estate they own, but it's an opportunity for them to take that money and build it in other ways.
Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Sam Cooper. I'm an attorney in Harrisburg at the law firm of Joker Paxton, Philadelphia-based firm. And not to sound like a shameless plug for my firm, our firm worked with Mary Lewandowski in Allentown to put together the homeless zone. And I have a quick question regarding that. If you had to do it over again, what would you change in terms of that NIS approach to make sure that equity is built in those parts of the community that need it the most?
Yeah. I propose, after the whole thing got underway, that we provide an incentive to employers to pay livable wages. And man, I got roughed up bad. I bailed out on that proposal fairly quickly. But that would be certainly one provision, is that, you know, any new jobs created need to pay something that enables people to actually pay their bills. That would be probably the top one. And then secondly, I would have had some kind of a product in place that helps smaller property owners get in on the action. I asked the developer about how do we get the small-time property owners in the NIS up to speed so that they don't miss this opportunity of their ship coming in. And he said the best thing to do would be to convince them to sell the property to me. So, you know, theoretically, they'd be selling it at value added, you know, and they'd be able to get money out of it that way. But JB's a hell of a developer. He's a shrewd guy. JB's not going to want to pay any more than he has to. So that equation is a tough one. But those would be the two main things. One would be some kind of a wage floor, and second would be some kind of equity building product that enables property owners in and around the NIS to take advantage of the property values rising along the way.
I don't think I do. I think I agree with both of those, but the only other comment I'd make is I wouldn't do any radical surgery to it because it's produced incredible results. And you know, don't tinker with success, or at least don't tinker too much on it.
I was just going to make a statement based on the question about how does this.
I think the question was how do small business owners benefit, and I understand about the leasing issue, but in Bethlehem and Lancaster and in Allentown, at least the Lancaster model, they didn't really pick a zone, or in the case of Bethlehem, they picked certain industrial properties. The way that the Lancaster creates, and I would encourage your organizers to look at it, they looked at all the commercial properties citywide, and they picked properties in neighborhoods and in downtowns. They didn't limit to just one particular geographic area. So essentially any underperforming commercial property citywide was put into the CRIS. So it was more of a basically anywhere in the city. So in theory, I mean, only one or two properties so far have taken advantage of it. And that was the Brunswick, was a very large hotel. But it remains to be seen if a small business owner can understand how it works. I think we're at the beginning stages in Lancaster anyway, to teach or for people to understand how to use this tax incentive at the state level, but it has to be intentional. We have to get there.
Other questions?
Just a quick observation, another thing, but I noted how Mayor Panofsky did it, and one of the ways he did it with this and with the economic development in Allentown, and certainly not intended to Allentown, it's certainly not unique, is he formed a partnership with certain sectors and sectors of the business community, of the private profit-making community. One of those sectors was the legal sector. And I can't impress enough how in partnering with law firms and lawyers, you can accomplish many things. And one of those things is it helps to give you access to those centers of power that exist in those communities. Because oftentimes we lawyers represent those centers of power and all. And when you form those kinds of partnerships, it gives you that ability to work with those sectors and to use the very resources that those firms can bring to the table, not just in terms of contacts, but in terms of dollars and economics and all. And also working with the nonprofit sector as we do. So meshing and melding all that together, I think is a key thing. And so please look at the firms that are in the communities, respective firms that are there, and look and see who's in those firms and how they can help you with this kind of issue in building equities for those very places that need the most.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that and sort of meld that with the last comment that helping small businesses understand this is no small task. This is complicated, and there are a lot of big developers don't really have their arms around it yet. And obviously, the legal community and other professionals in local communities can help a lot in getting small businesses to understand how to take advantage of this directly rather than indirectly.
We've talked a lot, sort of, talked directly and talked around the job issue. And particularly the job issue for less advantaged members of the society. We heard, obviously, some approaches this morning about specific workforce development programs, trying to tie them into particular industries. You all have been involved in various guises with public programs. What would you suggest in terms of tweaking these programs to help get more of the jobs or more of the job opportunities directly to underemployed, unemployed people?
I love the slide in our lunch presentation from Cleveland that it's a three-part equation that just starts with creating the jobs. Then you need the job training, and you could argue you need the improved educational system feeding into that training that needs to be radically improved. And then you need to have the jobs in the right place, or you need to deal with getting people who really need the jobs access to the jobs. But you can't be urban industrial development or downtown development in terms of getting jobs in the right place that the people who need the jobs are trained for them and then can actually get there.
I just want to point out that almost all of the new jobs have been part-time and like $8, $9 an hour jobs. So we're not talking about life-changing kinds of things. Life-starting kinds of stuff. Get a little bit extra money in your pocket. Hopefully you get some job history. That job history gives you an opportunity to move up, or somebody gives you an opportunity to supervise your coworkers. It's a nasty marketplace out there. It's been 40 years since increased productivity has resulted in workers' wages rising. So there's some degree of the marketplace that I'm not sure how much we can impact, really, unfortunately.
Well, let me come at this from a different way. Are we allocating public resources in the best way possible? You look at these various.
Hell no.
Well, okay. All right, let me
That's my
answer.
Sticking to it.
At least in terms of these economic development programs, would we be better off taking the monies that we're spending for business development, business retention, and devote them instead toward in-depth worker training programs and better transportation that gets folks from where they live now to where the jobs are? Should we really be focusing as much on bringing jobs to downtown Bethlehem, or should we worry about getting people to the jobs that exist out in the metro area?
Capital is just too fluid. It's too easy for companies to move jobs offshore these days. And to be honest with you, buses don't take people where the jobs are located generally, but when they do, they're only not $8 or $9 an hour jobs, or $11 an hour jobs, and that might basically offset the cost of the bus fare. Our society, as I started to say at the beginning, is just not really interested in fairness and equity. Not enough, because if we were, we could do it. It's not a matter of whether we can, it's the will. And I hate to lecture, but I'm guessing very few people in this room would disagree with that. The question is, are there enough of us? I voted at 8 o'clock this morning. Howard, was the first voter. So the people who have the most to gain aren't voting, and the people who have the most to protect are. Nothing's gonna change. I don't know how to get it.
Scott, Jeff, do you have any take on this? You're working on it more from the inside.
A couple of things. The answer is yes. All of the above. So, there's a limited amount of resources. So what do you do? But personally, if there was only one thing that we would do, it would be infrastructure. I think without infrastructure, you don't have job creation, you don't have healthy communities. So if we were only going to do one thing, and that's personally how I feel, but
But when you look at sort of, Pennsylvania has been fortunate to have a pretty broad toolkit of things that we can do to help entrepreneurs from the time they have an idea through Ben Franklin Technology Development Authority, through the whole startup, the technical assistance with small business development centers, and technical assistance for manufacturers, and great local partners like CDFIs and economic development groups who have access to capital. Banks can't do it all, and the federal regulators are, got them by the ear, and so they can only do so much. And so these are the folks that are filling the gap to do that. Is that critical? Sure. It's especially critical for the types of business that we're talking about, access to capital, especially since the whole credit crisis, or whatever you want to call it, occurred. So, and then, as it was said, companies can move from here to there, anywhere, and do business just about. And so, like it or not, if you don't have tools to compete with what other regions and other states are doing, you're not going to get them. You're not going to get those jobs. So we need some of that too, because those are meaningful jobs. Pennsylvania is still the keystone state. There's a lot of good reasons for businesses to be here, all right? But in some cases, there's a whole industry that is incentives consulting, all right? True story. And so, that's part of the game too. So it's some of all the above if you want to catch the whole realm of possibilities.
One approach would seem to be a much more regional take on things. I mean, as we have it now, Allentown has the NIS, Bethlehem has the CRIS, Lancaster has the CRIS, Jennings clamoring for CRIS, Harrisburg wants the CRIS, York wants the CRIS. I mean, everybody is scrambling for these tax incentives, these tax programs. So you end up with this almost kind of crazy competition among a bunch of cities that at base are dealing with the same sorts of issues. And so it becomes in some ways more a zero-sum game than an expanding the pie type of environment. Is there anything is there any political will, or is there anything that could be done so that this gets addressed more on a regional level than a municipal level?
Well, that's a great question. I was chairman of the Lehigh Valley Economic Development Corporation Board when the NIS was being contemplated. And it wouldn't even exist if it had not gotten the support of that regional group. That people got to the understanding that it's not just a parochial benefit for those who will benefit directly from what happens in downtown Allentown, but it reflects on the whole region, that there is no such thing as a successful region with a totally failed downtown. I mean, it just carries over to everybody's and everything's perception. And that was a fairly heated argument. It ended up being a 19-2 vote of that board. And unfortunately, one of the no votes was the mayor of Bethel, who saw it in a parochial context and didn't want it to pass. Then when he could get the CRIS, then it was okay again. But for the most part, I think those kind of regional perspectives on these things benefit everybody in an 800,000 person region rather than just in one downtown is an important perspective on a lot of these things.
I think the things that we need to do that we aren't demonstrating a willingness to do is, 501 school districts is ridiculous. You can't have a public school system where, you've got abject poverty across the street from ridiculous wealth. There needs to be multi-municipal plans. When you've got a situation where the burden of a new Walmart, for example, falls on neighboring municipalities with infrastructure, but all the tax revenue from it goes to the municipality where the business is located, it's ridiculous. We should have countywide planning, not municipal planning. We should have countywide school systems like most of the southern states have, not this 501 school district thing. We should be paying for, it just goes on and on and on like that. If we did those things, I think, and got them right, I don't think we would need these kinds of specialized programs that only exist in Allentown, Lancaster, and Bethlehem. We need this kind of thing going on everywhere in Pennsylvania. So.
And what role should the state be playing in this? I mean, given that
all those things I just talked about are all state. They're all state issues. And the state planning board a few years ago recommended all this stuff, and it went nowhere. The balance of power has shifted to the suburbs. They're protecting what they've got, and, you know, they've got their quaint little white communities, and, you know, they're not gonna give it up without a fight, so.
And something really important happened in Harrisburg last week when the House of Representatives passed a bill to revise how we tax people in Pennsylvania. And that's a good start towards some of the things that Alan talked about. All right, and we're gonna, you know, Governor Wolf's approach to this whole tax reform thing is, and I can tell you, strategy is, we won't need all of these zones if we do it right with local tax reform, a state tax reform. All right, that will help solve a lot of the problems that we're talking about now. You know, I'm interested to hear Alan, and I'm glad I didn't have to say it. But, you know, anyone remembers when Governor Rendell talked about consolidating school districts, and they just about tarred and feathered him. I mean, they were laughed out of the budget address. You know, we would never do that. So it's the whole sovereign nation thing. We got 2,560 some of them in Pennsylvania still.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Bridget. That's Raphael Checker. I'm a private person, a private individual. You all will agree with me that economic development starts at the individual level. It takes an individual, then family, then community to actually start a viable economic development program. Having said that, I raised this question to the woman that spoke on workforce development, and I was asking, no one touched on education regarding financial literacy, getting people to learn how to manage their finances. It does not start at the time we are all grown up. It starts from the cradle. There should be a financial literacy program starting from the kindergarten level to high school level, whereby children at that age would have learned the ABCs of financing, that they do not run into the problem of having bad credit. By the time you go for a job now, most positions, they run your financial, credit report. And as an individual, an entrepreneur, before you can get financing, if your credit is bad, you cannot develop that project or that business you're trying to create in the community. So we need a program that will really focus on creating a financial literacy program and being a part of the school curriculum, right from K1 to K12. And that will help because it takes individuals to get all the things we've been talking about all morning to get rolling. And if we cannot manage our finances, you know what, we'll not be able to manage those. Thank you.
Any other questions folks have? If not, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for an informative session. And I think we've got a little bit of a break now. About 5-minute break. And again, because I'd like an extra cookie, please don't forget the evaluation sheet. Thank you.